I want to briefly talk about Miranda rights and how they relate to confessions and interrogations. If you've ever watched any crime drama or police procedural, you've probably heard the Miranda warnings read many times. Probably so many times that you can recite them on your own. The term Miranda warning actually came from a case in which a man named Ernesto Miranda was accused of a sexual assault. And because of the way that his questioning was conducted, the case was appealed up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court issued an opinion that laid out the sort of minimum requirements for what a suspect should be given when he or she is being questioned by the police. And as you know from having heard the Miranda warnings, a suspect has the right to remain silent. They don't have to say anything to the officers if they don't want to. They have a right to an attorney to be with them when they are questioned. And if they are unable to afford an attorney, a public defender or some other sort of attorney who's appointed by the court will represent them and be there with them when they're being questioned. The Supreme Court had essentially suggested, and in cases that have followed the Miranda warnings, the Supreme Court has said that the defendant must acknowledge their understanding of these rights. But what we often see is that police officers who are reading the suspect his or her rights will sort of blast through them really quickly and then ask the person to sign at the bottom indicating that they have been read their rights and that they are willing to proceed with the interrogation. Despite the Supreme Court's insistence that defendants be given their Miranda warnings, about 80% of people still waive their rights to remain silent and to not give a statement or to have an attorney present and subject themselves to an interrogation. So, I've heard officers complain that, if I have to explain these rights and make sure they understand them, then suspects are less likely to give us a confession. But the research shows that a sizable number of people will still go ahead and give a confession after they've been read their Miranda warnings. Some of the factors that have been shown to increase the likelihood of a false confession include the fatigue of a suspect. So if a suspect is questioned for hours and hours, he may be more likely to give a confession to end the interrogation, or just simply due to the breakdown of his resolve in being able to push back against the officers who are questioning him. Another factor that has been associated with false confessions is a compliant personality. So a person who is compliant may be more willing to bend to authority and to respond to aggressive interrogation tactics. A compliant personality may be more likely to acquiesce and to confess to a crime even if they didn't commit it. A third factor that's been associated with false confessions is youthfulness or immaturity, and we tend to see this very often in children and adolescents who are being interrogated. Oftentimes we see that a child or an adolescent who is being questioned may make an impulsive decision to confess to a crime simply because he believes that if he confesses to the crime, he'll be allowed to go home, or the unpleasant interrogation session will end. Finally, one of the things that has been associated with false confessions is individuals who have lower cognitive functioning or some sort of intellectual disability. These individuals may be more likely to acquiesce to the interrogators and may be more likely to have trouble understanding the potential consequences of their actions. Again, they may believe that if they just go ahead and give a statement, that the unpleasant interrogation session will end and they'll be allowed to go home. If you've had a chance to watch the Making a Murderer documentary, the adolescent who is a significant part of that documentary, who's a co-defendant in the offense, had both immaturity and intellectual disability issues at play when he was giving his statement. And if you watch some of the videos, which I'll post a link so you can have access to those, you can see that he was interrogated multiple times over multiple hours, and that he ultimately gave statements that involved him in the murder. If you watch closely, you'll see that in his statements he essentially goes ahead and confesses to a murder, and then expects that he will be allowed to go home to watch a wrestling match that's on television. So it was clear that he didn't fully understand the significance of what it was that he was admitting to. That's really all I have for this lecture. If you have any questions or anything, please feel free to email me or to post questions to the discussion board. Thanks.